Today is August the 4th, 2016. My name is Tanya Fincham. I'm with Oklahoma State University, and today I am in Vinita, Oklahoma to speak with Lavon Hightower Lewis, and this is regarding Vinita's Glass House Restaurant. So thank you for having us today.
Thank you for letting me come today. It's really an honor to be here. And working at the Glass House was really one of the highlights of my life as a young person. And of course, there's been other things more important, but that's been very meaningful in my life. And I just want to say right up front that I feel like my work at the Glass House prepared me for my career at the phone company, and because when I left the Glass House, I felt like that I could work anywhere. I had worked with at the Hotel Vinita Coffee Shop for 3 years with Mrs. Driscoll as the manager and as a waitress. And when I went to work at the Glass House, Annabell Southern at the Glass House and Mrs. Driscoll worked together to change me from one place to another. They were good friends. And I never applied for the job at the Glass House. Mrs. Driscoll and Annabell did it because I was going to go off to college, I know, and I could make more money in tips at the Glass House. And so I left the Hotel Vinita Coffee Shop one day and reported the next day to the Glass House. And I've always thought that was so unusual. I never did ask Annabell about that, but that must have been what they did because they just told me to show up at the Glass House.
No application, no interview.
No. And of course, the Hotel Vinita was comparable in menu and quality of service and all of that the Glass House was. It was one of the best places in town to eat. And the Grand Cafe was the other one that was our direct competitor. Then the Glass House, of course, was on the Turnpike, so it wasn't exactly our competitor. But those two places were really great places to eat, and you might say a little more high-class dining. On Sundays there, we served on linen tablecloths with linen napkins and real silver and china.
Just on Sundays?
Yes, at the hotel, yes. And then we had nice serviceware, during the week, but we didn't use our linen tablecloths. We used paper napkins during the week. I think maybe in the evening, because we were open at the hotel in the evening till 8, and probably for supper. I don't think we had linen tablecloths, but it was a little fancier because we had a full menu in the evening. But it was comparable to the Glass House, and so I was originally trained then as a waitress at the Hotel Vinita Coffee Shop. And so I feel like that's why Annabell then could accept me so easily, because she knew I already knew all the basics. But then I had to be trained to Annabell's way. And Annabell was very tough, but she was very kind-hearted and would just do anything for you. And she was one that would roll up her sleeves and get her hands down in the dishwater. My husband said, because he was a dishwasher and busboy, and she would get in there and show him how to do things, and she was never afraid of work. So she expected all of us to work as hard as she did. And she wasn't afraid to get down dirty doing anything. And she was a wonderful boss to work for, but she was tough. She didn't take much from anybody, but she was very kind-hearted.
And how old were you at that point?
I was 17 and then turned 18 in July.
So you started at the Grand Hotel earlier than that?
At the Vinita Hotel, yes. I started when I was 15 at the Hotel Vinita and walked to work because I wasn't driving, And it was about 6 or 8 blocks to walk to work. And I worked every afternoon after school, 5:30 to 8, or until we cleaned up. And then Saturdays and Sundays.
Just because you wanted to, or
yes.
Did your parents encourage you to?
Well, yes, mother encouraged too. And one of my girlfriend's mother called and told mother about the job. And I can remember mom coming out, and I was out in the garden, and she came out and talked to me about if I wanted to go to work at the hotel as a waitress. So that was a lot of fun. And those were all wonderful days, because I think even now, my own children went to work when they were young teens and still in high school. I always encourage that. I asked my daddy, you know, when he was going to buy me a car, and he said, you can get your car the same way I got it. You can just work for it, and that's what I did.
Well, then we should back up and ask, when did you graduate from high school?
In 1967.
And from Vinita?
Yes.
Were you born and raised in Vinita?
Yes, I was born and raised in Vinita, and went through Vinita schools and graduated, and we have a little club of girlfriends from 67, and we've added a few from 68 and 66 that we meet every few months to have lunch together.
That's cool.
And we had a class group of 96 people in our graduating class, and so we knew everybody in our class. We weren't all friends and we weren't all close, but a lot of these girlfriends, I was in Campfire Girls and then Horizon Club with them, and so we had that relationship all the way through. But I've told some of these same girls that I like them a lot better now than I did in high school because there's so much that goes on in high school that really is not real life, you know. And some people look back and hate the things that they went through in high school, and so they don't want to have anything to do with the people they graduated with. But I think that's kind of silly because we've all become maybe better people than we were back then.
Did you have a favorite subject in high school?
Oh, my favorite was English. And I was always straight A's in English. I had a good grade point average, but I was always straight A's in English. And my senior year, I took 2 English classes, and one of them was creative writing. And Mrs. Tyler was the teacher in that class, and everybody just groaned and said, it's bad enough to have senior English with Mrs. Tyler, why would you take a second class? But I really loved her, and I think she loved me. And Annabelle and Mrs. Tyler were cousins, I think. They might have been sisters. I'm really not sure about the relationship, but they were close, and they were related. And I've given a lot of credit to Mrs. Tyler too. And you know, I mentioned I write the devotional, and it's in 5 newspapers now. And some years ago, before Mrs. Tyler passed away, I saw her at the grocery store, and we exchanged pleasantries as you do. And I turned to walk away, and she said, Lavon, I've been meaning to tell you that I really enjoy your devotionals. And oh my gosh, I was just stunned that my high school English teacher would compliment me on my writing. That was really good for my ego, you know.
Didn't say you need to work on your commas.
No, no, commas are my thing. You know, we have a real thing about commas. And of course, I've learned a lot in the Christian writing group that I belong to in Tulsa.
Well, in high school, had you planned? You mentioned college. What were you planning to do?
My English was my major,
okay.
And I went off a year after I worked that summer at the Glass House. I went off to ORU for a year, and scraped and saved all my money to go and borrowed some to go to ORU for the first year. And then I worked at another restaurant in town in Vinita because I did not go back and apply again at the Glass House or at the Hotel Vinita. So they didn't need anybody when I went to get a job. So I worked that summer at the Dewar & Pauline's restaurant, but I got stuck on nights. And Dewar & Pauline's was a wonderful place, but of course on nights it was all of the people that worked nights, or truck drivers, or people that went out on Friday and Saturday night, and they'd come in half drunk at 4 in the morning on Saturday or Sunday morning. And one man had a theory that if you ate a T-bone steak and drank a glass of buttermilk and coffee, that you would get over your drunk and have without any hangover. I don't know if it ever worked, but that was a lot of fun. But see, those were things we really didn't deal with at the Hotel Vinita Coffee Shop or at the Glass House. Mm-hmm. And but I was so thankful for my experience because all of those things, you know, have made me who I am today. And so the traits that I learned from the hotel and the Glass House were to be on time. And that was one thing that would really get you in trouble. is not being on time because you were needed when you were supposed to be there. So tardies were frowned upon, and you just didn't call in sick. Unless you were really sick with something that was contagious that you could give to somebody else, you came on. There were lots of times that I worked with a headache and just pumped the coffee and kept going. Or the Pepsi. I really was not much on coffee, but Pepsi-holic back in those days. And so I learned that being reliable and punctual and showing up on time and doing your things you were assigned to do. And I was never too good to do anything that I was asked to do. So that meant if something happened and I had to mop the floor, then you just jumped in and did it. And those were the things that I learned being a waitress at those two places. And Annabell and Mrs. Driscoll at the hotel too. Both had a real big impact on my life.
It's interesting that you call her Annabell and not Mrs. Southern.
Yes. And Mrs. Driscoll, her name was Gertrude, but nobody called Mrs. Driscoll Gertrude. And so that was the difference. I thought of that myself when I was going through preparing for this. That was the difference between Mrs. Driscoll, the prim and proper. At that time, she was probably 65 years old, and I'm 67 now. But then that seems so old. And Annabell was probably in her 40s.
Okay.
35 or 40. But it really wasn't an age difference. It was sort of a generational difference because Mrs. Driscoll was prim and proper, and you spoke to her only when you had to, and you didn't dare be sitting down when she walked in. Annabell was more flexible. You know, if you were sitting down taking your break when she walked in, she never paid any attention to it. But Mrs. Driscoll would always question if you were really entitled to be sitting down at that time taking a break. But we always worked hard for Annabell too, she wasn't really like my girlfriends. I didn't have that kind of relationship with her. In later years, when I knew her in town, we always had a wonderful friendship. But she wasn't ever. I didn't ever consider her my girlfriend when I worked for her. She was still my boss.
Closer to your mother's age?
No, I don't think she was even as old as my mother. But then my mother was about 32 when she had me. Mm-hmm. So my mother just passed away in March at age 98. Mm-hmm. And she had started working when she was 16, or maybe even before that, taking care of sick folks and doing different things. And then she lived out in the country, and she came to Vinita. And from then on, she called herself a Vinitan. She lived in Vinita. She was from out there, but she lived in Vinita, and Vinita was her home. And in later years, she would say, you know, I know everybody in Vinita. And I'd say, no, you don't anymore, Mom. But Mother had worked as a maid and housekeeper for some of the rich ladies in town. And so she knew the value of hard work. And she expected all of us to do the same thing. But she was a wonderful mother. She was always helpful and kind, and helped us when we were young mothers with our children, lived away from town. Both my sister and I especially have lived with her at different times, and so the last 2 years of her life, then we were able to take care of her in her home. And then with home health care and hospice, we were able to keep her in her home until she passed away.
98, that's...
Yes, it was marvelous. I hope to live to 98, and as well as she was. She knew who her girls were right up until the end.
So there were just two of you?
No, we have an older sister, Edine, who's 6 years older than me, and she raised her family down at Broken Arrow. So she was away from here, and she got married when she was 17. Now, of course, we're close to her. We three girls are very close. And then our younger brother passed away about 15 years ago of he had encephalitis and then died basically of a heart attack, and at age 46. And he was really more well known in the city of Vinita than we were, because he was assistant manager of Homeland and before that Safeway. So really everybody knew him. And when I came back from living in Okmulgee for 7 years, I told everybody I was Ross Hightower's sister because they didn't know me anymore. And so there were 4 of us kids, and we were raised here, and our dad worked out of town, so we credit our mother with our good raising, and of course he had an impact too, but he worked for the railroad. And he was gone all
Hightower's
the
an
time.
unusual name, is it?
Irish or English.
Okay.
Yes, and we've done lots of genealogy research. The Hightower goes back to England, but we have not crossed the pond, they say it, with Hightower. But we've done a lot of it, and I've done the DNA with Ancestry. That was so fun. And I am 38% Irish, which is no surprise. I was red-headed, strawberry blonde as a little kid, you know, and freckle-faced, and so that was no surprise to hear that I was. And then 25 or 30% Scandinavian. And of course, you know, the TV show, Discovery Channel or TLC, one of them, has the show of the Vikings. Well, the Vikings from the Scandinavia came into England and Ireland and Scotland, invaded in the early, like, year 1000 or 1100. And so I'm sure that's where the Scandinavian came from. And less than 1% Native American. I thought that was so fun. But that does prove our Native American link. And our grandmother Hightower, whose maiden name was Brock, was black-headed with black eyes, and she claimed a quarter Cherokee, but they were never on the rolls. And then her 2 sisters that still were both married Indian men. So I thought when we go down to visit them, I thought I was a little Indian girl too. But we had a wonderful upbringing, and our mother taught us the value of work. And I tried to instill that in my children. And then now as an adult, I think to myself, I wonder if I trained my children to work too hard. My son is a service manager at a boat dealership over on Grand Lake. Before that, he's been a finance manager at car dealerships and also car salesman and other things. And he works 5 and 6 days a week. And in the summertime, sometimes it's 7 days a week at the boat dealership. They are open 7 days a week. And there's another service manager, so he gets 1 weekend day off. He gets off Saturday. And then my daughter is a RN, and she moved back from Oklahoma City after being a customer service person for Dell and AOL and Singular before it became AT&T. And she said she was sick of customer service because every call that she answered, somebody was mad.
Because something didn't work, yes.
And she was not the one that was responsible for them being mad. And so she decided she was going to go into nursing. So I begged her to move home and live with us for 2 years while she went to LPN school. And then she moved out, and as soon as she graduated there, she went to RN school and finished RN. And she's a hospice nurse. And
It takes a lot, a special person.
yes, and right now she is doing what I would call marketing for the hospice, going to nursing homes and doctor's offices, making visits to acquaint them to the hospice company that she works for.
Still some customer service in there,
Yes,
but in a different
yes,
direction.
in a different way. I have told her, and I think everybody needs to know that even though we had hardships and problems in our life and things that we went through that we didn't want to be doing while we were going through them, like when I moved to Okmulgee, I had to take a job as a waitress again, and I had a year and a half of college, and I took typing and shorthand, and I could do filing, and I did all of the bookkeeping and all those things, but nobody would hire me. And my husband was going to tech school, and so I had to take another job as a waitress. I called crying to Mother, asking her to pray that I could find a job. Then I called her back crying because I had to take a job as a waitress. And she said, "But honey, you have a job." And then I found out in later years I had allergies, and so I had coughing spells on the job, so they had to let me go because I was coughing. And the man said, you know, if you had if the health department came in and you had a coughing spell, they could shut me down. And you're a good waitress, but I just have to let you go. So I called Mother again crying because I lost my job. You know? But I went to work then for the phone company while living in Okmulgee. And I started there in 71 and then retired in 2003.
Was that before they made it split?
Yes. In 71, I worked on what we call the cord board in Okmulgee, and that was where you picked out a cord with a metal end on it and plugged it into a hole with a light and said, operator, you know, and this was after number please. Number please was before people got the opportunity to dial their own numbers, but we were long distance operators and directory assistants. And I worked that in Okmulgee for 3 years, and then in 74 we all went to Tulsa, and that's when we got direct dialing, 1+ and 0+ dialing in 71, and they called it rehoming everybody to Tulsa. And so Okmulgee and Claremore went the first group went to Tulsa, and a car full of us girls from Okmulgee started driving from Okmulgee to Tulsa every day, right in downtown Tulsa. And then I got a divorce in 77 and moved back to Vinita to be close to our families. And then I started driving from here to Tulsa. So 10 years altogether I drove to Tulsa from Okmulgee and Vinita. And then in 84 I got one of the men's jobs here in Vinita. And 3 old guys retired the same day, and they put 2 people back in those jobs. So one of the old guys was a local man, well known, named C.J. Postier, and the other one was Derry Daniels, and another man he was from out of town. And Derry Daniels passed away within a couple of years after he retired, which was so sad. And C.J. lived a long time, and he would come into the office to visit, and I'd tell him that 3 men retired and they only put 2 people back in, so 1 woman replaced 2 men. We had a lot of fun with that.
It is typically a man's job?
Yes, it was. And I worked with the dial tone equipment, the long distance equipment, and I've often said that if I had any idea what I would go through in that 19 years of my life working that job, I would have never had the guts to do it. But as I said, Annabell and Mrs. Driscoll too made me think I could do anything. Made me think I could. And there was a man who had been an operator with us, because in that department in Tulsa as telephone operators, lots of times a man could hire in as an operator and get his foot in the door, and 6 months later then he could transfer out to one of the men's jobs. And so he came in and worked with us for about 6 months, and then he transferred onto a different floor as a repeater technician, they called him at that time. And he kept coming down and having lunch with us girls, and he would tell me, Lavon, you are very smart. I know you can do that. I know you can pass that test. And it was a sort of placement test or an aptitude test to see if you could do it. So he brought me books to learn transition theory and binary number systems, which I had studied in high school with Mr. Suter, our math teacher, our famous math teacher in Vinita. And I had learned the numbering systems. We are on the digital system, which is 0 through 10 or 0 through 9. And the binary, it uses 0 and 1, and that's what computer systems are set up on, is binary number system. And so I already knew that, so I learned the transistor theory, and then went in and took the test and passed that, and then was able to get a transfer into one of those jobs. And those jobs were traditionally held by men, so it was a big thing for a woman to get one of those jobs. And
how were you received by the men?
Not very well. There was one guy that I dearly love, but the first year that I worked there, he cussed me all the time. And I told him, I worked with 150 women down there, and those women can out-cuss you. I've heard everything that you can say, so it doesn't do any good. But I proved myself in that 19 years with those men. And when I left, then they were sorry to see me go. And it was a selfish feeling, because then they got somebody that didn't know anything, just like I was at the beginning of my job.
Was it a woman or a man?
No, it was a man. It was a man. But I took a retirement. They were closing a big office in Tulsa, and I was a union member, and we had voluntary severance built into that union contract. And so with my 32 years of service, I got a year's pay to retire early in '03, and I was not quite 54 years old. And I was able to set up a retirement with that money, and with the lump, I took a lump sum in my retirement money. I was able to set it up so that I was able to draw off of it. So I've been retired.
Since you were before 55.
Yes,
Wow.
yes. So, gosh, I can't even figure that many years. About
12 or 13.
About 13 years, yes. But it was a wonderful job. But I went to a lot of phone company schools, Chicago and Raleigh, North Carolina, San Antonio. And then later, they started having all of the schools in Dallas. And so we would fly into Dallas in a shuttle, pick us up and take us to the school. And we had little condos, you know. And the food service, I always paid attention in later years to the food service. And at that time, it was provided through Marriott. And it was very good food. It was very good food. At the school, we were all on campus. And if you had a car or knew somebody, you know, you could drive off campus. But we were on a closed campus, so it was very safe. And so it was a wonderful experience. But in the later years, I had to pass several pass-fail classes. And if you didn't pass those classes, then you didn't get to keep your job. You had to go find a different job, go back to operator services or something. But we're getting way off of.
Well, no, it's just since you were talking about 19 years, when did you meet your love,
Yes.
your husband?
Well, we'll talk about
Current.
that. Okay. So I transferred in, I was making 50 cents an hour plus tips.
Okay.
And the first day on the job, I saw a boy that I remember from high school. He was a year behind me. I married a younger man. So I saw him, and the way that the kitchen was set up, from the dining room, you walk down a hall, and on both sides actually, were places where you prepared the drinks, tea, coffee, pop, whatever, and desserts and things like that were all along here. And then you went through a doorway into the back kitchen, and right there was a dumbwaiter. And so right down the hall and right in front of you was a dumbwaiter, and it had a conveyor belt with little things that stuck out, and you would slide your dirty dishes on a tray onto there, and it took it down to the basement.
Okay.
And they pull those off in the dish room and to wash the dishes. And you know, everybody invariably being in a rush would hit that thing, and the tray would tip and dishes would fall down the dumbwaiter. And trays would get stuck. And so the dumbwaiter quit, and one of the dishmen, the busboy, he worked busboy and a dishwasher, he came up to work on the dumbwaiter. And I saw him, and Mike, my husband, is 6'4", and he stands out in the crowd. Now he says, I'll say, what are you up to? And he'll say 6'3 3/4" and 225, 250 or whatever. That's his joke. And so I saw him, and he stood out in the crowd, and I remembered him from high school, see. And I had just graduated, so he still had another year of high school to go to. And I can't tell you, he says I was making goo-goo eyes at him. You know, that's what we called it back then, making flirty eyes. And he called it goo-goo eyes. So anyway, before the very long, it wasn't that day, but a day or two later, he asked me out. And we went to the drive-in. You know, there wasn't much to do in Vinita. Drag Main, and we would drive in our car down to a place called Trails End, and then turn around, and it was like Sonic would be now, and drive around. It was a drive-in, and they had a place to eat inside. Drive around and come back down Main Street, and then go over by the post office and do a U-turn, and then drive it again. My uncle told me one time, when you ever stop, you might get a boyfriend. How is the boyfriend supposed to catch you if you're driving all the time? But that was one thing that we did a lot as teenagers in Vinita. And then we had a drive-in movie theater about 2 miles out of town, where the Church of Christ is now, on that piece of property. And when they tore down the drive-in, the Church of Christ bought that property and built a new church out there. And so that was one of the things that we always went went to the drive-in movie, and then there's the movie theater downtown, which is the same movie theater that was in my high school days, except they have divided it up now into 2 rooms so they can show 2 movies at the same time.
What's the name of it?
Center Theater. And the drive-in was called the Lariat. So we started dating that summer and working together, and we both worked the morning shift, and we had to be there at 5:30, and I believe they opened at 6, and then we got off at 2 o'clock. And so we would stay out late at night and maybe get a couple hours sleep, and you know, probably shouldn't tell this on video, but we would neck in the car a little bit before we had to go into work, you know, and then we'd go in and work a shift. Then we each went to our own individual homes and napped all afternoon, and then started all over again. And so he worked in the dish room, but he had already worked there a year. So Annabell would pull him out of the dish room to do various things. And one time she pulled him out and said, go help Joe Leathers cut up some meat. And now the Glass House cut their own meat. I don't think they brought in a half a beef. I think that it was already quartered probably. But they ground their own hamburger there. And I think that they probably cut their own steaks there from a side of beef, you know, from the steak part of it. But I do know that they ground their own hamburger meat there. And everything that what they served was made on the premises. And they also made the food for the Miami office and dining room there, which was sort of like a snack bar. It wasn't nearly as big and elaborate as the Glass House in Vinita. But they took the food up there every day. They transported food from the Glass House in Vinita up there to serve. And they did all of their food there in the hotel, in the Glass House. And so Warren Feder, who was, we called him Annabell's right-hand man, and he gave me a long list of things that he did in his career, but assistant manager was one of the main ones. So he brought me a scrapbook, and these menus were in there, and I thought that we'd look at these menus. I loved the chicken pot pie. And now when we served the chicken pot pie, it was a bowl with a pie crust, round pie crust on top of it, and then you carried it out on a plate. And of course we served the person's food from the left, and we served the drinks from the right, on their right hand. Okay, now if they were in the booth, because there was a row of booths on the one side of the dining room. If they were in a booth, of course, you reached across. But when they were sitting at a table, you always served their food from the left. And so we would set that down, and the chicken pot pie, you would say, "Shall I serve you?" And usually they'd say yes. And so then you use some sort of utensil that I can't remember to lift the crust off of the chicken pot pie and put on their plate. And then, you know, you were holding the little bowl, and then you would spoon the pot pie stuffing over the crust. Isn't that fun? And there were a lot of things that we served that were flamboyant like that. I like to think that made it a special experience for them. And I think that Annabell wanted the Glass House dining room to be a separate experience. The Glass House had a snack bar that was open all night, and probably opened 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, and was open all night to serve truckers or people that stopped at night. And that was at one end of the, I believe it was on the south end of the Glass House. And then on the other end was the gift shop. On the northwest side, I guess you would call that, east side was the dining room. And on the west side, facing toward Tulsa, was the cafeteria. Okay, so they were separated by a long hallway, and the hallway on one end was the snack bar, on the other end was the gift shop. Okay. And then the dining room was the place that I worked, and that's where we were were real waitresses compared to a waitress in the cafeteria, serving in a cafeteria line, and then the snack bar working as a waitress. So I think probably most of us considered ourselves superior to them because we had the job in the dining room.
Higher up the food chain.
Yes, yes. And so the name of the dining room was called the broiler room. So here is a broiler room menu, and this doesn't have a date on it, but it shows the chef's feature for tonight was beef stroganoff. And boneless breast of chicken Mornier. Now Mornier meant, if I'm not mistaken, that is a sort of sauce, and it says it was served on fresh broccoli with Mornier sauce, and I think that was a cheese sauce, but I'm not positive about Mornier sauce. And the jumbo shrimp on this dinner menu was $2.65. Can you imagine? And I think in this menu it was even less than that. The chunks of prime beef tenderloin and fresh mushroom calves, I remember that one. And it was served with blue cheese, melted blue cheese, and a baked potato. And that was $3.50 for tenderloin. Can you imagine? And then everyone, when you talk, who worked there in the Glass House dining room, when you talk to them and ask them, what's the one thing you remember that we served in the Glass House dining room? They always remember the Mile High lemon pie. Now this one shows the Mile High coconut cream pie, and I don't particularly remember the coconut cream pie. I remember it as lemon pie, but it was made as a tall pie to begin with. They mounded all of the filling up in the center where we would kind of level it off. They mounded it up in the center.
Okay.
And this says that it, someplace I saw that it was served with whipped cream. I really thought it was meringue. But then they topped that with the whipped cream or meringue. And so it stood up about that tall off the plate. So when a waitress would come out to bring the Mile High lemon pie to serve it, everybody would gasp and turn and look at it as you walked by. It was really exciting to serve. And we had a parfait that was made with creme de menthe, which is liquor. You know, it's a liqueur. And I never did like it. I tried a little taste of it. It was pukey to me. But anyway, I don't know that that was on this. Yes, Dutch right here.
It was 45 cents for the pie.
For the pie. The parfait was 75. Rich Dutch chocolate ice cream with creme de menthe piled in a tall glass and heaped with mocha, whipped cream, and nuts. Can't you just imagine? And we layered that. Now, I thought that they made that in the kitchen, but the girl that you probably talked to first this morning, Edith Hicks, told me that the waitresses served that the ice cream was on the waitresses station, and that we made that up and served that. So that was really exciting to be able to serve this. Now look, here is a sirloin strip steak, $5.
It had to be in the 60s or early 70s.
Yes.
Maybe.
Oh, yes. I think this was probably one that that we used.
Do you know why they called it the broiler room?
Yes, because there was a broiler that they cooked the steaks and the hamburgers on.
Okay.
And the hamburgers, I believe I remember that they were like a half a pound of hamburger. Let's see if I can find the... I don't see the hamburger on this menu. Maybe they didn't serve the hamburger at night. They made you buy steak. But
would you have to share your tips, or did you get to keep?
No, we all kept our own tips, individual tips. And I worked the summer of '67. Then I went to ORU for a year. Then I came back, and as I said, I didn't get to go back to work at the Glass House that summer because I didn't apply in time, and she was already full. And I worked at another restaurant. Then I got sick and didn't get to go back to college at ORU the second year. And that was kind of sad because I had scholarships. I had the whole second year paid for after I had scrimped and saved so hard for the first year. But I didn't get to go back. It was 5 weeks or so that I was sick and not able, and I missed too much class. So they saved my scholarships for second semester, and then I started going with this first guy that I married, and he didn't want me to go off to Tulsa. He wanted me to stay in Vinita. And so I turned down my scholarship for second semester at ORU and stayed in Vinita. By that time, in about September, I went back to work at the Glass House. And I worked from September to about August the next year at, that'd be 69, at the Glass House. And in April, I got married to Mr. Coleman, and that's when I brought along the gift that Annabell gave me. I should have cleaned this up, but the silver buyers on eBay and places want the patina. They don't want you to shine them up. They want the patina. So I left the patina on my dessert cup or candy dish. And this is what Annabell gave me when I got married to Mr. Coleman. And I was real impressed with her gift because she didn't have to give me anything. And I had a shower. I don't remember Annabell coming to the shower, but I know that she gave me this gift. And this is a Paul Revere ware, and it's sterling silver. And so I have just treasured this over the years that it came from Annabell. And so that was when I got married in 69, and I worked then all that time. And then in the fall of 69, I got a chance to go to work at a furniture factory that had opened here in Vinita. And so I worked there for a year, and in 1970 in the fall semester, we went to Okmulgee Tech School, and we moved to Okmulgee, and I was there 7 years and then came back. By that time I was working at the phone company, of course, then. But I would see Annabell around, or we would be in clubs together and meet, and I dearly loved her right up until the end. She was a really special person. And one of the things that several people told me that she did was that she gave jobs to kids, like in high school, that really she didn't have a job open for them, but she would make work for them to do. And my husband said that he was making 85 cents an hour, I believe he said, working for Annabell. And in the spring, when the college students were going to be coming back, he saw a paper in the office that said that she was hiring one of the boys from college at $1.25 an hour. And he said, Annabell, that's not right. He said, I'm working for you for 85 cents an hour, and I've been with you for a year. And this guy's coming back from college, and he's been gone, and you're going to give him $1.25 an hour. Why is that? And she told Mike that it was because the college boys needed more money, for their college. And she made it a practice to support kids that were going off to college. And I talked to several people in arranging these interviews that said that they worked 5 summers while they were going to college, or they worked 7 summers, and that they always came back and worked for Annabell in the summer. And sometimes they come back and work Christmas break. And at that time, we didn't have long spring breaks like we do now. So that, we didn't work spring breaks. But I know that I did work some for her that first year I was gone during my Christmas break. I had 3 weeks off, I think, and I worked a little bit at that time. But she made it a practice to support the kids that were going off to college. And in going through the scrapbooks that Warren Fetter brought, I found lots of places where she had kept records of somebody graduating from OSU. And there were several that she made sure that they got scholarships in food management. And they went to one man that went to OSU in food management and then graduated with his degree in food management. And that's in those scrapbooks that Annabell had put together. And you can tell that she put those together chronologically instead of going back and putting them all in at one time, because they're all spaced out according to when they happened. And I really believe that she kept those scrapbooks up as she was going through. And so there were some of those people that were special to her. And then one man, and I'm sure you'll be interviewing him, that when he went off to college, then he was hired as the manager of the gift shop in the Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City for a while. I don't remember now who that was, but there was one of those men that I scheduled that worked at the Cowboy Hall of Fame.
She touched a lot of people, it sounds like.
Yes, she did. Now, Warren told me that I asked him what his job title was, and he said that he was assistant manager here. He started out as a dishwasher and busboy and janitor or whatever, and then became the assistant manager, and then he went off to working for Host International in Indiana, and he and Annabell set up a Indian village in Indiana somewhere that Host International owned. I thought that was really interesting. So you'll have to be sure to ask him about that.
Well, when you were a waitress, let's talk about your uniform since we took a picture of it
yes.
before we forget it.
Yes, that was the hottest uniform, and any of us really like it. But now, when I told people that I have some of those uniforms, 2 of those uniforms, they were thrilled to find that out. But the gold is made out of nylon acetate, and it would melt when you ironed it. So you had to iron it, if you did, with a very low heat. And then the aprons were made of heavy 100% cotton, and we had to starch those, and it has the bib, and then we had a little headpiece that we wore. One of the girls told me that in early days they had a little tiny chef's hat that they wore, but we didn't wear those. We had a big bow, and it was just simply a square piece of material that you ironed out flat. Then you gathered it in the middle and tied the ribbon around it and turned it into a bow, and then you used a bobby pin to stick it in the back of your hair. And then, I don't have one today, but we wore those uniforms all the way closed at the neck and had a black ribbon that we tied into a bow around the neck too. And so those were really special, and everybody loves them, but we hated them when we had to wear them and iron them.
And you had to keep it clean yourself and do all that?
Yes, we did all that ourselves.
I noticed there's no pockets like for taking orders.
In the orange uniform itself, there is a pocket.
Okay.
And we had our order books. I think I always probably had that in one hand and in one side and tips in the other, you know.
Well, what was considered a big tip?
We frequently got a dollar tip, so I would think a couple of dollars was probably a really good tip. And I worked mornings, and those girls that worked evenings, I'm sure the reason I didn't work evening is that they wanted to work evenings, because if they were selling steak for $3.50 or $5, then they were getting bigger tips than that. You see? So they probably didn't, any of them, want to give up their evening shift job, because that's where the big bucks was. And someone told me that they remembered the girls folding their dollars into, and then bobby pinning them to their uniform bib. But I don't believe that we ever did that. By '67, the glass house had been open almost 10 years, like 9 years. And in the scrapbook that I brought, the Tulsa World article about it is dated, I think, February of 1958 was when they opened. And we Venetans got where we took it for granted. But the glass house is a nationally known location. I've been off at the telephone company schools, and they'd say, "Where do you work? Where do you live?" And I'd say, "Vinita, Oklahoma." "Oh, that's where the glass house is." Anybody that's ever been up and down I-44, Will Rogers Turnpike, has passed the glass house and knows where the glass house is. And, you know, we had a fine reputation. I wanted to talk about these, a few of these postcards that I have. This is a picture of the inside of the dining room. And now, I made a little note that decor now is called mid-century modern. You know, I watch House Hunters all the time, and those, especially in California, they're always looking for a mid-century modern home. They want a Frank Lloyd Wright home, or Frank Lloyd Wright was one of the ones. And do you see the lighting?
Yes.
And these were large windows, but they had louvers that shut. So you could partially shut or completely close off the east windows when the bright sunlight was coming through. Or the same, well, you didn't, the west side would have been the cafeteria, okay? So the sunlight on the west side would have been shining on the cafeteria. And you see in this picture, it's the, I don't know if you can see those or not, but it shows the tables with tablecloths. And I don't believe that we served on tablecloths all the time, linen tablecloths. But I believe that Sunday we always served on linen tablecloths, and probably in the evening. And then this picture is a little different view, and that shows the tables, individual tables showing.
And the windows different.
Yes. And now this is a picture of the cafeteria seating. And so that, and I suppose maybe they got their own drinks when they went through the cafeteria line. That looks like a drink bar right there. And behind this, right here, would have been the cafeteria line they went through and were served. Now, all these years, I've told misinformation about the cafeteria line because I thought they made their eggs from powdered eggs, and I never would eat them. But my husband told me that no, they weren't powdered eggs, that there was one person that was in charge in the dining room, in the kitchen, of breaking hundreds of eggs into giant vats or pots and scrambling them, and then they were served. Now, in the dining room, eggs were cooked to order. And the cook that worked the morning shift with me was a girl named Anita Webb, and she was the best breakfast cook I ever worked with. And if you said you wanted easy over eggs with the whites done, they came out perfectly every time. And I took lessons from her, and I'm real queasy about eggs. If the white has to be done for me, but I like my yolks running. If I can't have it that way, I want scrambled eggs, and I don't want any white showing in my scrambled eggs. They have to be totally yellow and cooked. They can't be wet, And I saw and watched her cooking eggs, and she was an expert at it, and I took lessons from her. And I remember her making the pancakes, and that she would put the pancakes on the grill, and then she flipped them over when they were ready to be turned over, and she never flipped them a second time, because when you flip them the second time, you knock the air out of them, and they are heavy instead of being light and fluffy. And that's the way I cook my pancakes too. And my kids used to always, every Saturday morning, want my pancakes. Of course, I fudged on it a little bit by using Bisquick, But I would always make mine thinner than the recipe called for, because I didn't like them real thick, because then you have trouble getting the middle of the dough. It would turn out doughy in the middle if you didn't get it completely cooked. And it was thinner at the glass house when she cooked them. And I can remember they used one of those big pots, which was probably about this tall, to make up the pancake batter. And whatever was left, they put back in the refrigerator, and then added ingredients to it and added to it and made another batch again. And I throw out any leftover pancake dough. Of course, I never have any leftover, but I couldn't imagine keeping it. But anyway, they kept it, and it was refrigerated. It was very good. Speaking of what we ate, my husband said that Annabell, they always talked about all these unusual foods, and he said he would love to have a lobster. Now, I don't remember eating any unusual foods. My idea would have been that if we did eat them, we just had to pay for it. If we got a T-bone steak, we would just have to pay for it like a customer. But my husband said that Annabell said, I will cook you what you want to eat one time. And so he said, I want a lobster. And so she personally cooked him a lobster to eat that one time. And she said, now that's all of the fancy food you get. Because she asked him what he wanted to eat that one time, and he got lobster. And I made a little note that I always thought she favored the men. You know, I think that she was nicer to the men than she was to the women. But she was not, they still had to do their job. She did not favor them enough to let them get by with anything. Because he told a story of one guy that was kind of having a nervous breakdown and couldn't stand anything, and he ran off down the turnpike, off the loading dock, you know, and he said he went in Annabell's office and said, well, there goes so-and-so down the turnpike. And he didn't come back in for 15 minutes, and she said, okay, that's it. And I guess this was the second or third time that he kind of acted out. And so she let him go. But that's the only person I ever heard of her ever letting go. And I was so sorry that my husband would not come in and be interviewed.
Did she have kids of her own?
No. She had a niece and nephew that my husband and several people asked me about if I had contacted them. And the girl's name was Beth Ann, and there are pictures in the scrapbook taken of Beth Ann and one of the workers at the glass house. And I think that she came down in the summer and spent some time with Annabell, several summers
Well, I
probably.
wonder where she got her training, Annabell. I mean, she had to have.
You know, I really don't know. I know that she was assistant manager when it first opened, and I think it was 2 years later before she became the full manager. And from what I read in the scrapbook, and she was mentioned before too, there was a lady named Mrs. Kellogg. They called her Kellogg, like a G on the end, but in the scrapbook, her name is spelled Kellow, Kellogg. Okay, and so she was the original manager, and then there were letters. There was a letter congratulating Annabell on becoming manager, and so I guess Mrs. Kellogg went on to Miami because I was told that she lived in Miami, and I never did work with her, but she evidently was running the office, the dining room in Miami.
Okay.
And I never did work with her. So I mentioned about the row of booths. The first booth, right beside the hallway where we made our drinks and did all of our work as waitresses, was the coffee break booth. And the men from the service station would come up and drink coffee with us. They were always so much fun. And the highway patrolmen would stop and come up and have their breaks there too. And so there were several highway patrol that we were well acquainted with back then. And Mr. Hamilton was one that I knew really well, and of course he's passed away many years ago. And there are several others. One of the men that worked in the service station was named Speedy Woman, and he has passed away. And he was one of the ones that was dressed up in the Indian costume.
His last name was what?
Woman.
Woman.
Wool.
I think woman. Speedy
No.
woman. No. Wool.
Wool.
Woolman.
M-A-N, yes. And there are still Woolman family in Vinita. And I believe that Speedy's daughter is the one that lives across from me, but that might be her name. Of course, she's married, but that might have been Speedy's niece, his brother's daughter. But I think this might be Speedy Woman dressed up in the Indian costume because
That's cool.
he was one of the ones that dressed up in the native costume. And one of the other girls that you're going to interview dressed as a Cherokee Indian girl, and she will be interviewed, so I won't tell her story. I mentioned that the broiler room was called that because of the big broiler, and I don't know if you can see that in one of these pictures. Go back to one of those dining room pictures.
It looks like someone's cooking by.
Okay, over there, yes. And the chef that worked that wore a tall hat. And one of the pictures that has that girl in it, Donna Secondine Parker, is a man with the tall chef's hat. And I guess he worked the broiler in the evening.
Okay.
And that was somewhat shaped like that, and they broiled the meat on the broiler. And so that was, and then right over on this side of that whole end was the morning cook griddle, you might call it, where hamburgers and pancakes and things like that were cooked. And now another thing about Anita cooking, I've been in a lot of restaurants that they cook the eggs on the grill, but she did not. She cooked them in a stainless steel pan with butter, and they were luscious, and they would just slide right out of the pan. When she was ready to serve them, she'd just dump them out on the plate, just as pretty as you please, and set them up there ready to be served. And it was a hard job. Now, one thing is that behind here, and I don't know that we have any place that shows it, there was another dining area. Yes, I believe this is looking back toward it. You see that? There was another dining area back there. And my junior and senior banquet was took place there at the Glass House. And my senior year, I still had the little, I think it was a drink cup, but of course they didn't serve us liquor. But it said senior banquet. And they served Oriental food. And that was the first time I'd ever eaten Oriental food, because they didn't cook anything really Oriental at the Hotel Vinita Coffee Shop. But that was where banquets were held, and a lot of people had their wedding receptions there or bridal showers. That was a room that was reserved to have banquets and things.
Fancy place.
Yes, it really was. It really was. Let me see if I've left anything out. So I got married there in 1969. My boyfriend, the summer that I worked at 67, was still in high school, had another year of school when I went off to college. And he would come and get me at ORU and bring me home on the weekends and things like that. And then he was 17, I was 18. We were young. We didn't know anything about life. And I was at ORU and surrounded by guys from all over the United States. And it was a really big deal in early days of ORU. It was only a 450 group campus, only 450 students. And so you knew a lot of people. So I didn't want to be engaged or going steady anymore. So we broke up. And of course he says that I cheated on him. I didn't really cheat on him. I broke up with him, but he didn't let me break up with him. But I was broken up with him in my mind. Well, then I started going with Mr. Coleman, and then we got married in 69, and we were married about 7 years when we got a divorce. And I moved back to Vinita, moved a mobile home next door to my mother, and was driving to Tulsa. And my mother was in Kansas City one weekend on Saturday, and a letter came from Mike Lewis, who was my high school sweetheart. And I said, there can only be one Mike Lewis writing to my mother. And so I opened the letter, and he was in the Army, and he was going to be coming back to Vinita. And so I wrote him back and told him, come on out. He was asking where Bob and Lavon were. And I said, Bob is no more. We're divorced, and come on out, and I'll have a party, get some of our old buddies together. So I picked him up at the airport, and it was once again love at first sight. Then he had to go to Germany for a year. And I should have taken a leave from my job and gone to Germany with him, but I didn't. But I had almost 10 years with the phone company, and he had almost 10 years in the Army. So he got out to marry me, and then we had our career here in town. And he always supported my career, but that was in 1980. And so he had been was divorced, and I was divorced, and we resumed our relationship, and it was really wonderful. And it has been hard. There's, you can have a romantic beginning, a romantic ending, but living the life for any marriage is hardship. I mean, having to live with them. But we've had a wonderful time, and so it's 36 years this year. And I have a son by my first marriage, then we have a daughter together. And you know, I wouldn't trade anything that I've lived through in all my life. And I believe that Annabell prepared me for my career with the phone company. And I'm winning and benefiting from all of that today because I stayed with it. Because you couldn't quit on Annabell. She did not want quitters. And when you worked for Annabell, you gave it everything you had. And that's what the telephone company required. One day, my second mother-in-law said, I wish that Mike had that good job with the phone company and you could be off and stay home with the kids. And I said, Mike would never have put up with what I have all these many years. But, you know, it was a wonderful experience. And I know that having the relationship with Annabell and working at the Glass House prepared me for everything I've lived in life. I had a good mother prepared me early. I had Mrs. Driscoll that prepared me and Annabell. And of course then I have a lot of people in the phone company that were my mentors too. And so it's been a wonderful life. And now we are going to have a Glass House reunion at the end of August. And I'm really looking forward to that. We've never had a Glass House reunion before. As far as I know, there has never been one. Now, in the scrapbooks in 1972, they had an employees' party, and she kept a lot of pictures and papers about that. And she was an event planner. We didn't call it that then. But she had menus written down with the recipes and who was to do what and where. And they dressed up in costumes. It was around Halloween. They dressed up in costumes for Halloween. And they had people singing. And the story about the leg bone, the foot bone connected to the ankle bone, that Hear the Word of the Lord, that song. And she planned all of that event. And so she was so talented, and I think everybody that ever worked for her really loved her, and she was a wonderful person to work for. And I don't go, you wouldn't hear me saying this about some of my wonderful women bosses at the phone company. I had good bosses at the phone company, but I really am being truthful about the way Annabell was, because she had an impact on everyone's life. She was just so wonderful. And she was rough. She expected you to do the job. So it wasn't all, you know, candies and cream. It was work. But she was also fair. And yes, so I'm so glad I had that experience of being able to work at the phone company. So thank you for giving me this privilege of being interviewed. And I'm so glad that I was able to do the contacting people, contacting people, because I have had so much fun on the phone for hours with those people talking about the old days at the Glass House. And I really hope that they remember to tell you some of those wonderful stories.
If they don't, we'll poke them again.
Yes. And one more thing about I said that they made everything that was served there. They also made all of these wonderful desserts. Southern pecan pie, that was my husband's favorite, and he said that he would cut a piece of the pecan pie before it ever left the bakery. They had a bakery, a dish room, inventory storage, storeroom, you know, downstairs, and Annabell's office was down there. And so he said that pecan pie was one of his favorites. They had cherry pie and different kinds of cake, and I remember the strawberry shortcake. And that the sponge cake was made there at the Glass House too. And you know, I'm one that I have never liked the little sponge cakes that you buy, you know. When you've ever had the real thing, you just can't really go with it. I like angel food cake with strawberries, but it's just not the same thing. And then my first mother-in-law was an absolute cook, and she cooked biscuits. She cooked a sweet biscuit and then cut that in half, great big biscuit, cut that in half and served her strawberries on that, so I love it that way too. And a strawberry pie made with gelatin, where you cook your pie crust, you set your strawberries up with the pointed end up, and then you mix some some more strawberries mixed, cut up and stirred up with cornstarch and sugar, and it makes a sort of a jello, and you pour that over your pie, and then that congeals around your fresh strawberries, and that's an excellent one too, and they serve that out there too, and that was a specialty also at the Hotel Vinita Coffee Shop. But they were wonderful cooks. I don't remember ever eating anything there that I did not.
Well, did the recipes survive?
I found some recipes in the scrapbooks.
Cool.
And I'm going to make copies of all of the pictures, scan them in, and I might send some of those if you'd like to have those. Warren did not give them to me, but I told him I wanted to scan them in and save that stuff on computer. And he said, you can keep them as long as you need them, and I think he's going to donate them to Eastern Trails Museum.
Good.
I think the books themselves are falling apart, so I believe they will have to be rebound or reset in.
Well, scan them
scrapbook.
before you redo them.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
And the menus.
And the menus, yes. And I took pictures. These big menus are hard, but I did take pictures of them, you know, with my little iPhone and in halves, and posted those on our little group on Facebook. I'm really big on Facebook groups. So it's been wonderful talking to you,
Yes,
and
it
I'm
is.
so glad that we had this opportunity, and I'm so glad that the Glass House is getting the recognition that it should have, because it is a major part of Oklahoma history.
Yeah, we appreciate all your work with this too. It's
Thank you.
made ours easy.
Good, good.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.